Excellencies. Hello. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome to the start of our second CTBT Science Diplomacy Symposium. In a few moments, we will go through the program that is ahead of you for the next 2 weeks before we continue with the sessions themselves. But to start with, please let me introduce to you the Director of the Legal and External Relations Division, Mr. Xiaoning Wang, who will deliver some introductory remarks. Mr. Wang.
Your Excellencies, dear participants, it is a great pleasure to speak to you this morning and to welcome you all to this symposium. The program before you is a very rich one. It covers the political origins of the treaty, the scientific genesis, and the future of the verification regime, and the role of the CTBT in international peace and security. There are many interesting panels coming up this week and the next, with so many great speakers. My colleagues will go through the program with you in more detail in a moment, but I want to particularly draw your attention to the high-level session that will take place this Friday, which will feature a number of keynote addresses and stimulating discussions. I'm especially excited about the hands-on nature of this symposium. In addition to taking part in practical demonstrations of CTBT technologies and the methods of analysis, participants will also have the opportunity to conduct an executive council simulation with a realistic scenario leading to a deliberation on a possible on-site inspection. We are encouraging all of you to actively contribute to this symposium. I'm sure that many of you are already ready to suggest practical options and solutions for progress on entering the force of the CTBT. As you all know, these are interesting times where the global ban on nuclear tests is concerned. Call it good timing, perhaps, but the eyes of the world will be on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea as it moves forward with its stated plans to close down its nuclear test site. The question on many of you and our minds will be, how can the international community ensure that the nuclear testing is truly relegated to the past? Perhaps current events help account for the high interest in our symposium. We have some 350 registered participants, online and offline, from all corners of the globe. With the exception of DPRK, we have in attendance persons from all over the Annex II states still to ratify the CTBT, the treaty. We are delighted to have such a diverse group with us over the next 2 weeks. We have participants from the CTBTO youth group who are going to and who have been doing so much to promote the treaty and who will take over the session later this morning, so to speak. We have government officials dealing with the science and policy aspects of the CTBT. We have university professors and students, parliamentarians, and many more besides. I want to extend a special welcome to representatives of the many non-ratifying states, including a number of small island states who have made their journey to be with us today. We very much hope that your stay in Vienna will be fruitful, and you can rest assured that my team, my colleagues here, will do all our can to answer any of your questions and help broaden your understanding of the benefits of the treaty. Let me finish by wishing you all a productive and inspiring symposium. In all these years organizing and implementing educational activities, my division has drawn the conclusion that learning is not a one-way street. We are all part of a learning circle, and we have much to learn from you as you do from us. I encourage you to make your voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. Can I just ask if you can put the next slide on? Thank you. So this morning, the purpose of this introductory session is to go through the program a little bit, to ensure that everybody is aware of what you have in store for you today and on other days, before we move on into the main part of the session. Before we go any further, I would like to introduce to you the External Relations and International Cooperation team, most of whom are represented here today. And as Mr. Wang said, we are here to help. If you have any questions during the course of your stay here, we will be happy to speak to you individually or in groups and to help overcome any issues that you have, whether they are practical or more substantive. We're here to help in every way we can. The acting chief, Mr. Bazorg-Merziran, will also join us later. A couple of household issues I just want to raise before we move on. Registration, I think most of you will already have completed your registration procedures, but if not, we have 2 registration desks on each side of the room here. So if you have not yet done so, I would ask you at some point to see our colleagues at the registration desks and ensure that you're properly signed in. I'd also like to remind you about the completion of the modules, the educational modules that were shared with you in advance of the symposium. If you haven't done so, kindly register and enroll on the CTBTO Knowledge and Training portal and do complete the modules before the end of the symposium. Many of you have asked about the program. We're going to go through it right now. We are endeavoring, as much of the international community and international organizations do, to operate in a more paperless manner. The best way of keeping updated with the program is to use the conference app, the Symposium app. Many of you should have received an email yesterday with details on how to download and enroll into this app, which is available on both iOS and Android platforms. If for some reason you haven't received this, again, my colleagues at the registration desks can help you with that. The app doesn't only contain the program, it has a number of other functions that I think should make the symposium all the more exciting for you. It contains lists of speakers, the biographies of the speakers. It also allows you to connect with other participants, which is very useful. And it has a number of social functions. In particular, we will be using it to gather questions and answers for panels as the symposium progresses. And it also has a number of other functions, such as voting, which is a function that we may use next week when we move on with the more hands-on part of the program. So now you will see on the screen in front of me the details of what you have in store this morning. After this little introduction, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues from Public Information for a session on spreading the word, the CTBT and media. Following that, we are going to have a presentation and discussion from MEPHI, the Moscow Physics and Engineering University. The Moscow Youth Conference, in which MEPHI was very much involved, was one of the major projects of the year. And MEPHI will present on the work that it is carrying out and will also introduce a very interesting competition that they're proposing to hold during the course of the symposium. So I won't say any more about that. I will leave it up to MEPHI to go into more detail. Finally, we will have a session led entirely by the CTBTO Youth Group. As many of you will know, the CTBTO Youth Group, which was established at the last symposium 2 years ago, has gone from strength to strength and is really one of the most exciting tools we have for promotion of the CTBT right now. So a few words about the program. After these more introductory and other activities this morning, we will this afternoon move into a couple of presentations going into the background of the CTBT, looking into how to understand the CTBT better, scope, obligations and compliance, the political and legal framework, and the details on the preparatory commission and how the future organization will look once entry into force is achieved. I know that we have many participants with varying degrees of connection and knowledge about the CTBT, so we very much hope that these sessions in the afternoon will help everybody arrive at least a common base of understanding on the main issues on CTBT. From tomorrow onwards, we will move into a number of very interesting and exciting panel discussions looking at a range of issues. Tomorrow morning, we will be examining the CTBT negotiations, going right back to the discussions in the Conference on Disarmament that led to the opening for signature of the treaty. And we are delighted to have, as part of that panel, people who were very much involved at the time, including, and if I may point him out right now, former Executive Secretary Emeritus, Mr. Wolfgang Hoffmann, who has kindly joined us this morning. You're very welcome, sir. We will continue with panel discussions on the consequences of nuclear testing before we go into presentations and demonstrations on how the CTBT verification system works. Our experts from the International Monitoring System Division and the International Data Center Division will demonstrate to you exactly how the CTBT operates in practice and answer any questions that you may have. One thing I would like to point out is that on Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. we will have a technical keynote by an eminent scientist, Professor Paul Richards, on verifying a nuclear test ban, a historical perspective. And you're all very welcome, of course, to join that. On Thursday morning, another high point will be the academic roundtable, where we will look at how academic communities have and continue to connect with CTBTO as an organization and with CTBT as a theme, both in science and policy matters, and how such activities can be used also to promote the CTBT into the future. We will continue with panel discussions, one on arms control and disarmament verification, one on looking at CTBT issues in Asia in particular, before we move on to the high-level session on Friday. The high-level session will feature a number of eminent speakers, government ministers and others, and we will also have an expert dialogue on assessing current global security, the current global security context, successes, challenges, and possible ways forward. And of course, the key panel discussion on science diplomacy in support of peace and security. Moving on, if I may, to next week, we will have a number of visits and demonstrations, including to the Atom Institute here in Vienna, and also to the CTBTO facilities here in the Vienna International Center. Again, if you have not yet done so, there will be sign-up sheets at both of the registration desks here in the room, and I'd encourage you kindly to sign up as soon as you can for that, so we can be sure of the numbers. The second half of the week, next week, is more or less devoted to the concept of on-site inspection, which is a very important part of the verification regime. We have a full day on OSI issues on Wednesday of next week, and on Thursday and Friday, we have what for many people in the past has been a highlight of our education activities, and that is a simulation of an Executive Council decision on on-site inspections. Before we move on with the program, I would like to hand over to my colleague Nikita Perfilyev, who will explain more about what we have in store for that session. Nikita.
Thank you, Cormac. You'll have a big briefing next week. Thank you. Big briefing next week on Monday, I believe. So just now, just a couple of words about the simulation. How many people here have played Model UN? Okay, there are some, and I'm sure there are some people who participated in real exercises. So it's lots of fun, the activity. We will be simulating an on-site inspection request sometime in the future. So we will be in the world that is identical to ours, with the two differences. One is the CTBT is in the force, even though it's not yet. For the purpose of the simulation, it will be in force. It means that all annexed 2 states ratified the treaty. And there will be 2 countries that don't exist in our world, but they will exist in the simulation world, and you'll receive the data on those countries. One will be Equilibria, it's the country that is requesting on-site inspection, and the second country will be Atlantis. It's the country that is thought to be inspected where a suspicious event took place. In fact, the suspicious event took place today. So you will be receiving the data on the simulation, the instructions, country assignments, hopefully by the end of the week. So please do sign up for indicate that you're here, so we don't miss you. You will not be assigned the country of your own country, so you'll be playing some other country. I would encourage actually participants maybe from the permanent missions here. So if you have time, please do join us. Your experience would be very welcome in leading some of the younger participant students, for example, showing how it works in a real world. So all the materials on the instructions you'll receive, there'll be plenty of time to ask questions, and you will have online team as well. So as Cormac mentioned, there is several hundred people following online. Hopefully they will be active. They will receive country assignment as well, and they will act as your capital. So you may receive instructions from them. But yeah, you'll receive it by the end of the week, and have fun with the simulation.
Thank you, Nikita. We're about to move on to the first main session, spreading the news. Before I do so, there is one additional household issue, and this is in response to the many queries that have come to my colleagues in the registration desk. Smoking. Smoking is only allowed in certain designated areas in the Vienna International Center. For those who do wish to smoke, my advice is to take the elevator to the rotunda, then take an escalator downstairs to the car park, and there are signs to the ground level where there are clearly designated smoking areas. Thank you for that. So now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to my colleague Elisabeth Wächter, who is Chief of Public Information here at the CTBTO, and also to Peter Rickwood. Thank you very much.
There. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Cormac and colleagues from, we like to call them ERIC. A funny story on that, it's External Relations and International Cooperation, but the section is called ERIC. And when I first started my job here at the CTBTO, it took me about 3 weeks to figure out who is this ERIC everybody keeps talking about. Anyway, who is this ERIC is all of the people you just saw. So if you hear ERIC, it's not a person, it's a group of very competent, very excellent colleagues, so thank you for that. So I'm very honored and humbled to be given the first speaking slot for this very important, very exciting symposium, so thank you very much for that. And so I have a couple of thoughts on communications. There's an old joke that if you have a headache and you go to a dentist, he's going to pull your tooth. And if you go to a chiropractor, he's going to crack your neck. And if you go to a surgeon, he's probably going to take out your appendix. So, of course, if you ask the Chief of Public Information what needs to be done to get the CTBT into force, of course I'm going to say public information. So, but jokes aside, I am absolutely convinced, and I think many people share this conviction, that this treaty will only succeed if people care about it. And the only way that we care about it is if we know about it. The problem with events such as this one is that we end up preaching to the converted. We're all on board. We all think this treaty is important. We are passionate about the treaty. We want it to come into force. But we need to spread the word. We need to get the information out there. I think there's a number of different ways in which we as an organization try to do this, and that's my job. And I have the support of, I think, the entire organization and an excellent team. We also now more increasingly have the support of a very active, very committed group of young people in the CTBTO youth group who are helping us in this task. But it goes further. Everybody has their role to play. we had the previous symposium 2 years ago, we organized a panel discussion for journalists. And we asked them what, if you participated then you might recall, we said, what do you need? What do journalists need? What does media need to be able to talk about the treaty with more authority? Why is there not more coverage of the treaty in the media? What can we do as an organization, as people passionate about this treaty and this organization, to help journalists tell the story of the CTBT and the CTBTO and its verification regime? And a couple of things came out of that discussion. One of them was that, of course, the role of media and the status of media have changed quite dramatically over the past decade or so, and that's absolutely something to keep in mind when talking about public information and communications. We have a more 24-hour news cycle, the rise of citizen journalism, the rise of social media. All these things have affected the way in which we are able to tell the story. The other thing that hasn't changed, of course, is and has in fact maybe become even more important than it ever was before. It's the importance of accuracy, of facts versus opinions, of facts versus fiction. I'm not going to say fake news because that's such a loaded word these days, or expression. But especially in a scientific organization such as ours, I think we cannot overstate the importance of being factually accurate and correct, and helping journalists understand the facts behind the work that we do and the science behind the work that we do. One person, and I should have introduced him earlier, who helps us tremendously in doing this work is Peter Rickwood from Atomic Reporters. So thank you very much for being here, Peter. And I'll hand over to Peter in a short second, and he can talk more about what his organization does and how this is linked to what we do and our topic this morning. Excuse me. I had a little look at our statistics, and I was under the impression, and I thought maybe it's just an impression, maybe it's just me, but I think that things have started to change in terms of reporting on the CTBT. I think that there has been, or my impression was, that there has been an increase in media coverage of our work. And I looked at our statistics. We do keep statistics of this, and it's actually true. So I think we can all give ourselves a collective pat on the back. Just want to share some of these with you. In 2015, we recorded a total of 906 mentions in the media of the CTBT. That's not a lot, 906 in a whole year. In 2016, those were 1,471, and in 2017, those were 3,904. So that's a huge increase. So it's not just me, it's not just my impression, but we actually have seen an enormous increase. Now, big caveat, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So we're not pretending that these are by any way, shape, or form scientifically accurate figures. Our methodology has changed over the years. Things have changed. The way we collect news has changed. So, but this is a snapshot, an indication, and it is backed up by things I've heard people say, including our executive secretary, who is also, as you know, our best spokesperson for the organization, and has done a huge amount in raising the profile of the organization. Just to compare, for the first quarter of 2018, we had 748 mentions of the CTBT in the press. So that's not bad, I think. The more difficult thing is to kind of try and understand why. Why is there more mentions of the CTBT? Well, we like to think it's because we're doing a good job, of course. But I think it's the news cycle has something to do with it. Non-proliferation and disarmament subjects have become more prominent in the media. What is happening in North Korea at the moment, obviously, makes people more interested. But even if we look at the last 2 years, there were 3 announced nuclear tests by the DPRK in that time period. So there is more reporting in general about nuclear subjects and non-proliferation in particular. But also, this increase does coincide with the foundation of the youth group. And I think there is a correlation here. There's a correlation because we have more young people helping us spread the word. And I'm hugely grateful for every single one of you, the support and the dedication and passion you've put into helping us spread the word. But it also, there is a general growth in interest in young people stepping up. We've seen the enormous movement of young people making their voices heard in the context, say, of the gun control debate in the United States, but also in other countries. So this movement that young people are actually not finding a voice, but having a voice, making it heard, being out there and being very outspoken about issues is in itself newsworthy. And is getting a lot of coverage. So that is, I think, another thing. And then I think the other thing that we've seen is that we see much more coverage and a better understanding in the public in general of some of the other benefits of the international monitoring system, of the IMS, of the verification regime. And an example there, I see my colleague Mario in the back seat, so I'm grateful for him, because the issue of the Argentinian submarine at the end of last year gave us probably more media coverage than we had from the announced nuclear test by the DPRK. Just a couple of weeks prior to that, simply because there's an interest. People want to know the science, people want to know the facts, and we're ready to provide those facts. And I think that's, it again shows the importance of being factually accurate and also available with that information to the general public and to the media. I am going to hand over to Peter, and
Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces, old friends, I like to think. And it's a great pleasure to have everybody here, and I welcome you all. Just a quick point before I get into the meat of what I want to discuss. Whether you stand the CTBT on its head, whether you eviscerate it, whatever you want to do with it, the damn thing is no less relevant today than it ever was when it was first brought when it was first opened for signature. So I think that's remarkable, and I think it's something you should obviously take away with you from this symposium. It's alive and well. How it's treated is up to the member states, obviously, and I'm not going to go there. Thank you. I don't know who's got good eyesight, but there's a book that I refer to quite a lot, and it's called When the Press Fails. It has significance for me because I worked in the IAEA newsroom from 2001, and I worked through one of the key subjects of this book, which was the coverage prior to the Iraq war at the end of, well, throughout 2002, and of course into early 2003. It was a pretty sad story. And I'm not going to go into it in great depth. But there should be a new book now, and it should be When the Press Disappears. Because it ain't around anymore. I'm Canadian, so I talk from my perspective. In Canada, let me bore you with a few figures. In Canada, in a decade, we've lost 16,000 jobs for journalists. 222 weeklies have closed down or merged, and 27 daily newspapers have disappeared. This is my lifeblood, so of course I shed tears and I wail in the night at the moon, but nevertheless, I think it's more important than my personal concern It's an issue of spreading the word. How do we now communicate through mass media? We know that there's been something called a digital revolution. We know that it has as many downsides. In a moment, I'm going to look at the upside. But let me just dwell on the negative for a moment. There's an interesting study that we had again in Canada where we take things rather seriously, as you probably know, and that study basically, determined that civic engagement, for God's sake, is what we all need, is closely related to local news. If you don't have reporters like I used to be when I was a young thing, going out there covering the local council, or for goodness sake, I even covered flower shows in my early years of reporting. That information isn't conveyed to people. They don't have that grist for the mill, the knowledge to chew on. So it's not simply about maintaining an industry that has obviously many flaws. I would never ever suggest it didn't, but it's something more important. Journalism is important. It's part of the social fabric that unites our communities. No matter what country we come from, we want to have those strong communities. And in Canada, we're pretty conclusive that part of the mix, part of the chemistry, is news media. Okay, so it doesn't look very good. The digital revolution, as you know, has resulted in advertising revenue going from traditional news media into the maws of Google, of Facebook, of all the other social media. But every dark cloud has a silver lining, was what my grandmother taught me. But it gives us, the digital revolution also gives us opportunities to communicate that we didn't have before. And I'm looking at some of you here who have, in fact, been helping with the newsroom project that we initiated last year, who we're going to talk about it in a moment, who I hope, will help us in the course of this symposium and into the future. We will, by the way, later in the week, be introducing you to something I think rather novel, and I'm quite happy and impressed by, that is the work of the newsroom. Because, we're talking about, we aren't giving anyone a voice. It's your voice. We can give you platforms, okay? But you have to open your mouths and you have to communicate. And I think I would say it's not a stretch of the imagination to state that civic engagement is being informed about a tool like the CTBT, particularly at a time now when, as I said earlier, we've seen how clearly, its utility really, really is. So what we hope, what we want to encourage you to do is to be the voices, to be the mechanisms, I'm lost for words, that fill the vacuum of the decline of traditional news media. If your boat is sinking, are you just going to sit there and watch the water flow in, or are you going to take a bailer and try and bail it out? And obviously, it's not only you alone who's bailing it out, there are other people in the boat, so we have to work together. It's a basic premise. So working together, in that sense, is what excites me, because you then become citizen journalists. I think you're going to see a nice example, as I said before, of what is achievable. We, Atomic Reporters, this little nonprofit that I run with a number of other people, is here to help you. Elizabeth's public information section is also here to help you. There are a lot of people who, if we work collectively, we can ensure some outcome, some quite impressive success. We're not asking you to be overtly partisan or to be critical though I mean, as a journalist, I would love to see that, but that's an aside. We want you to encourage the conversation about the CTBT. You know, a lot of people say, "What's a CTBT?" I don't know. It is what a nuclear. Still, I've talked to high schools. Jakob would probably know what I'm talking about, and the kids say, "I didn't know there were nuclear weapons. There's still nuclear weapons. You sure?" So there is just a lack of knowledge. And that's all we're trying to encourage, is to put the word out. How do you accomplish that in a way that is appealing, in a way that isn't talking down to people, but is in a manner that it doesn't matter if it's your hairdresser or your professor, that they will understand. And so this is the challenge of the Newsroom project. I think we're going to be continuing and flourishing. I've already had a couple of people say, would you like me to write about the symposium in the next few days? And yes, we would. Elizabeth and I would be absolutely delighted if some of you may recall the S&T conference last year, where people wrote about events at the conference. We put those stories online. How else did we communicate them? I think that was pretty much it. Yeah. So it's a way of you know, closing the circle. It's also a means of perhaps, you know, other people at the symposium have missed something. Maybe you found something that you know, that was of considerable interest, and you wanted to share that information. So the point is, we will have later today we'll have a brief meeting, and anyone who is interested in supporting us in this latest, branch of the Newsroom project, we would hope would come out to it, please. I think I've said enough. I do think there's one point that I didn't raise with you, and it's again very interesting. It concerns the digital revolution and how it's affected news media. What has happened is, and don't forget, news media is commercial. It has to be supported by some revenue somewhere. But the point now, and this is slowly dawning on people, is that the digital revolution has resulted in media no longer being as dependent on advertisers as they were. They're now dependent on readers. And more readers are supporting, subscribing, keeping poor old journalists like me in work so that we can put food on the table. Well, they're younger than me, trust me. Well, maybe not all. Anyway, but this is a new model, and you know, sometimes events change so quickly we don't always keep up with them. But that's one aspect. No matter where you are, the media is changing, but the necessity of communicating is even more important than it was. Informing, Elizabeth used the term, you know, factual, accurate information. This is what's important. Not your opinion, but getting the word out. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think one of the points that Peter made, I want to underline again, is, I mean, when we say we're not interested in opinions, of course we're interested in opinions, because part of the youth contribution is that we want to hear your opinion, but it doesn't have to be our opinion. It doesn't have to be. We're not asking people to do our propaganda for us. We're not asking people to toe the party line. We want a conversation to be happening. And it's, in fact, the people who disagree with us that we would most like to reach and most like to have a conversation with. And we need this help, this buzz, this you know, reaching out to other audiences who either don't know about us or vehemently disagree with us, and they might have very good points. It's about having a conversation, and I think that's really important. I wanted to make two other minor points. Of course, communication is more than just press. It's more than just media. There are a number of ways of communicating, and again here in our little universe that is the CTBTO, we do try to embrace a number of different ways of reaching out to different audiences. A symposium like this is one way. We support exhibits. In fact, we have a small exhibit up in the rotunda, and I would encourage you to have a look at that. And if I have youth group members who want to help us staff the exhibit, I'd be more than happy to hear from you. They're hands-on exhibits. They show the power of the international monitoring system. We have interactive station models. We have our OmniGlobe, which has become quite a popular outreach tool. These are all tools that are available to us and to you. We are showing on Friday afternoon, next Friday, not this week, but on the very last day of the symposium, we're going to be showing a film. So film screenings are, I think, a very powerful way of again, having a conversation about a topic that is as difficult and as technical as nuclear technology. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our colleagues from MEFI in a couple of minutes, because not only are they also contributing to our exhibit, they've produced some posters, which we will be adding to the exhibit later today, but they have also creative ways of talking about a test ban treaty or the test ban in general, and how to raise awareness among different audiences. So be creative, think outside the box, do other things. We've supported art initiatives here in the VIC and in other locations. We issued a stamp, for example, for our 20th anniversary. These are just the things we can think of. I'm sure that all of us together can think of other creative and innovative ways of keeping the conversation going, and including more people in the conversation. I think that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say. We do have information about, the last thing is we have a virtual reality film, which those people who participated in the Science and Technology Conference last year will be familiar with. We are installing that again as of tomorrow when we're in the other room, and people will be able to sign up and look at that. I think there's a number of other activities and events planned throughout the week that are communication in its broadest form. So do make sure you participate in that. And as Peter mentioned, we hope to get together again any young creative writers, filmmakers, producers, anybody who wants to write about this particular symposium, who wants to help us spread the word in that regard. We're going to try and meet today over lunch. I have to ask Kagan for a room, so we'll make an announcement of what the room might be. We'll probably meet around from 1:30 to 2:30. Gives you a chance to have a lunch. Maybe you bring your sandwich, and we sit around and see. So the youth newsroom will be up and running as of 1:30 today. I hope to see you there. And I think I have 2 minutes to see if there's any questions or comments. Please, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nicolas Fremy from the French Permanent Mission here in Vienna. Thank you very much for the very interesting comments and information you've given us this morning. I just had 2 questions. One is related to the indicators that you mentioned, of the mentioning of the CTBT on the websites. Do you have any kinds of qualifying the references? Because we all know that being referenced in Nature, for example, there was some article about the CTBT Nature this year, and being mentioned in the blog is not the same thing. So it's important to reckon how often CTBT is mentioned, but also with the quality of the mentioning. Mm-hmm. And my second question would be also on the promotion of CTBT in the press. My feeling is that most of the website of the CTBT and the publications are in English. And we all know that there are several official languages in the UN, and maybe it would be useful and help the CTBT to be better known, to have also publications, communications in Chinese, in Spanish, French, of course, dedicated to all countries that might be interested. So could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are two very valid points. When I mentioned our statistics, is we keep our own in-house statistics. We don't have the resources, unfortunately, to pay somebody to do a proper analysis of the sources. So this is just a numerical a collection of how often we get mentioned, and we include CNN and Nature and Science magazine in the same line as say a blog or a local paper. So that is one of the downsides of the way that we keep statistics, but at least we do keep statistics. So we acknowledge that, of course. The other question is also very valid, and I know it's something that is very close to our executive secretary's heart, is trying to get more information out in other languages. And again, it boils down to resources, unfortunately. If we had a team of 30 people, then I'm sure we could maintain websites in other languages. We don't. We have a team of 6. So it would be nice. However, we do translate material that is available. We have fact sheets in all the official languages. We've also done ad hoc translations of our fact sheet into languages that are perhaps even more relevant. For example, we did the fact sheet in Urdu a few years ago because we had a group of Pakistani journalists visiting us. So material is available. We have material on our cooperation with Africa available in English and French. We have cooperation with Latin American countries available in Spanish. So we do try and provide targeted information in other languages. It is something that we need to work on more. And if you're from the French Permanent Mission, perhaps we could have a chat about having a French JPO to help us in our efforts. Any other questions? Please go.
Thanks again for giving us the opportunity to come here. It's a wonderful feeling to be back with all of you. So I have a small suggestion, like what we do this back in India. By the way, I'm Gaurav Jha from New Delhi, India. And I have a suggestion that like what we do is after every program, we make a newspaper right in the date as the program is proceeding. Every day we make a newspaper, students only, and we get it printed and distributed to the next day. So if it's a 5-day program, 6-day program, we do it every day. So if feasible, if we have the logistics resources here and volunteers, of course, I'm pretty sure that many of us will be willing to work on such exciting projects. So I think we should go make a newspaper of CTBT Science and Diplomacy event every day also. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. We'll take you up on that offer. Thank you. Yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cassini Aronofsky. I'm from Mifi, Russia. And I have a question. When you were talking about spreading the goals of CTBT, did you mean just formidable mass media sources or studential mass media as well?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think at any level.
Yeah.
Any level?
Any single level, whether if you're a churchgoer, talk about it in your church community. If you belong to a band, talk about it with the band. You know what I mean? If you yes. So it can be, and an example is that the conversation rises as high as we can push it, but it begins at the lowest level on the ground, and then we can build from there.
I think that's our time slot more or less used up. So I will hand over to Cormac, who is our MC, I guess. Yes? So thank you very much, and I look very much forward to working with you over the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Peter. And we're now going to move on a little bit ahead of schedule, so you have maybe a few more minutes than originally planned, to our colleagues from MEFI, who will be presenting on their own activities and also, as I said, introducing a very exciting competition that's going to take place over the course of the next week here at the Symposium. Thank you.
Well, dear participants of the symposium, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Yelena Tsivkunova.
And my name is Anton Gerasimchuk.
Well, today it is a great pleasure for us to represent the Nuclear University MEFI on the margins of the second Science Diplomacy Symposium.
And MEFI right now is one of the best national universities in Russian Federation, which provides training in nuclear energy and radiation technologies,
nuclear non-proliferation and guarantees, nuclear physics, high energy physics,
biomedicine, information technologies, international scientific cooperation, and other strategically important fields.
Well, and it is important to mention that last year we celebrated our 75th anniversary. Well, the CTBTO youth group members who will be performing today are the students of the Institute of International Relations. And I want to say that the Institute of International Relations forms an integral part of MEFI's structure and organization. It prepares specialists in the field of international scientific, industrial and technological cooperation. So in other words, these are science diplomacy specialists.
And we're really proud to say that our institute was established by the initiative of the prominent Russian diplomat, who, by the way, signed CTBT in 1996, Yevgeny Primakov.
Well, Yevgeny Maximovich, took an active part, and he took part in the graduation ceremonies of our Institute of International Relations. He was absolutely sure that science, diplomacy, international relations operated hand in glove with each other, and they're very, very closely intertwined. Well, just now, let us provide a brief outline of the educational activities that were conducted at our university in cooperation with the CTBTO.
So in these pictures, you can see MEFI students who joined CTBTO youth group for the last year. So far, for now, the number of MEFI CYG members accounts for 26. They took an active part in different outreach and educational activities conducted with the cooperation with the CTBTO.
Well, the first outreach activity, the CTBTO Science and Policy Workshop, was implemented right before the Moscow CTBTO Youth Group Conference. And I should say that it was this workshop was very instrumental in preparing the MEFI students for more active participation in the conference. And I should also emphasize that the workshop serves as a good example of international fruitful cooperation of students, professors, graduate students, and the representatives of the CTBTO.
MEFI students cherish some sweet memories of the first CYG conference that was held in MEFI in October. This is, by the way, another example of youth contribution to the international peace and security, of their joint efforts to make our world a safer place. And again, we all wanted to thank everyone involved in this conference for the contribution to make this event special and memorable.
Well, the third outreach activity was embodied in the CYG-led course, the CTBT, the cornerstone of nuclear security. Well, the students were very much inspired by the Moscow conference, and just they designed and implemented an educational course to promote the values and the ideas of the CTBT. And by the way, just on the slide, you can see the pictures of our final interactive game, in which I was also engaged while just checking the students' knowledge.
Finally, in April, we organized the presentation contest, My Vision of the CTBTO. The contest was aimed at developing student skills to focus on key issues of the CTBTO and convey a strong message to the audience in a short time. It is, in our opinion, again, it's a very useful skill to professionally promote the CTBT and its entry into force.
Well, personally, for me, it was a great joy to see so many enthusiastic students who were willing to revitalize the discussion around the CTBT and actually who were ready to share their innovative and forward-looking proposals with the members of the jury. And I should also say that the online involvement of just Maria Chipurina and Anastasia Yefremova as the members of the jury, whom you can see in the picture, and I think they are, well, and whom you can see in the hall, just actually they made our contest more vigorous, more competitive, and more challenging. Well, thank you very much for your assistance, for your comments, and for your recommendations.
And to make our contest more challenging, we decided to use a kind of a competitive format, Pecha Kucha. It's a format of 2020.
Well, actually, if translated from Japanese, Pecha Kucha means chit-chat, blah, blah. It's a very communicative method of delivering a message. Actually, 20 slides advancing automatically make the presentation really very vigorous. Well, we know that Pecha Kucha is a registered trademark, so in our case, we used it as a private situation, just only for educational purposes.
Well, the road to success is often really bumpy with its ups and downs, but we strongly believe that cooperative efforts make this road smooth and enjoyable for all of us.
Well, that was a very, very brief outline of MIFI educational projects conducted with the support of the CTBTO. And now let me give the floor to our colleagues. They have designed their own memory box, and so let them unfold it. So let us meet Ksenia,
Daria,
Anna,
Veronica,
and Andrew.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to our colleagues and thanks all of you for this great opportunity that enables us to share some memories that we have regarding our involvement in the CTBTO activities. And as young people, we believe that indeed, like Elena has said, it is important to revitalize the discussion around the CTBT, and we believe that creativity methods must take place, and therefore we as CTBTO youth group members and the young generation, we are trying to be as creative as possible, and therefore our memory box will take kind of a poetic format, and I hope this will not by any means somehow diminish the officialness of our symposium. So shall we start? Thank you.
We'll now describe to you in rhymes, legit and beady, 4 great experiences we went through in MIFI. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty has got a lot to do with them. You'll see. The CTBT was a turning point in our attitudes to nature, to the world. It helped us see the other sides and ribs of many coins, as well as get acquainted with a lot of hearts of gold.
Natalia Zhurina, Yelena Tsevkunova, these are the names we should be thankful to. They tried to blast the CTBT supernova in every soul that's now on stage addressing you. They drew attention to the topic of the treaty that we would never ponder thoroughly before. The CYG was to arrive in Moscow city. We have to delve into the subject even more. And our masters must have really hung the moon. The course they read to us caused a tremendous boon. Absorbed by that ongoing fight for peaceful future, of which so little did we used to know, we let Yelena and Natalia suture the wounds of ignorance and crudeness in full flow. Ahead we had a thorny path to go.
Those classes were distinct in many ways, I reckon, from common lesson patterns we had seen. The former featured much more interaction. The latter simply weren't our scene. We all appreciated deeply the involvement of the CTBTO experts in the course. It was the vitally significant component that we could hear directly their comment on themes on which we'd previously discoursed. The magic worked. The words turned into suspense that filled the air around with peril and concern. Yelena and Natalia showed us concepts which we were earlier unable to discern. The Moscow conference approached meanwhile the setting, but we felt confident and grateful for the training.
The CTBTO youth group arrived in Moscow, and that October was the warmest one in years. The fall allowed harsh Russia once again to blossom, to greet the guests from different continents and hemispheres. The voice of youth has that unique potential to shed new light on a conspicuous case. The CYG calls must become essential in solving an apparent impasse in ratification of the CTBT in all Annex II states. The conference gave utterance to fresh and detailed insights into the current hurdles detaching us from peace. Beneath eluding sufferance, there's always a nuisance, abatable with goodwill instead of skepticism. Those speeches shifted gears of global mechanisms.
A rain unfortunately seeped through the agenda when we went to Dubna, a small and ambient town that houses a national data center amid the military facilities around. We saw in real life the monitoring methods, a radionuclide lab, sensors old and new. The tour was guided by the officers and experts, providing the complete and in-depth overview. The final day would be the most remembered for the exciting opportunity to chat informally with Dr. Zerbo that every present youth group member in Marriott Hotel then had. And should I say, he was no pompous, like eminence is thought to be, which helped to fix our Russian focus, as well as eyes and moral compass for life of the CTBT.
The Moscow conference was over. Horizons broadened in October, drove our passion to support the CTBTO endeavor. 3 youth group members came together. We felt like it was now or never, expressing quite a simple thought. Most students learn much more from peers than from professors, it appears. Then why don't we prepare a course, relate ourselves to sophomores? The course would focus on the treaty. Here comes the name, the CTBT, the cornerstone of nuclear security. One might subject it, though, to some unpleasant scrutiny. We held 5 90-minute sessions, the treaty history, provisions, the IMS, on-site inspections, and certainly the opposition and criticism the treaties faced. Surprisingly, the course embraced much more than we had planned to offer. We even had to dig up further, from geopolitics to physics, from rocket science to jokes and gimmicks. To check what we had thus accomplished, we asked the students to opine if they preferred to see abolished all nuclear tests or not, and why. We're glad to state that our students proved their eloquence and prudence. Despite that their perspectives differ, they caught the CTBT fever.
A student-led course is a roller coaster, but creativity is right there to help the youth. Each pair of our students was to draw a poster to illustrate their CTBT views. Pandora's box, the sword of Damocles, stairs, nuclei, bombs, missiles, planets, shields. The CTBTO might pick a symbol out. But wait please, one more thing we'd like to talk about.
A Pesha presentation comprises only 20 slides, a 20-second speech for each, and most importantly, good vibes you should include in your creation. Originated in Japan, it takes great skill to do this art, to carefully select the words, adjust the time and pictures, fonts, but having tried just once this craft, Once easily becomes his fan. So, as we had the skill down code, we made up our mind to hold a Pecha competition. In April, while exams were far, some students dared to leave ajar doors into their mind and vision of the preparatory commission. That was the topic to explore, so 10 attempts came to the fore.
I was among those who stepped forward, with eagerness to say out loud that it was high time we all followed the path away from battlegrounds, enlightened by the BTBT, the bridge to peace and mutual trust, may vanish under ash and dust, unless they lose the CTBT. I hope my speech would leave its sound to linger for some time around. I voiced my call to sign the treaty.
I was performing too that day. We called on to repudiate a doctrine on the wild presumption, the mutually assured destruction. Let's be sworn into plowshares now and usher in the new reality, to which we all be glad to vow the mutually assured prosperity. Then no red bottoms make you frown.
Well, here we stand so far before you, without words of gratitude. Alas, the Pecha curfew restrict the pace and magnitude. Nevertheless, we make a promise to carry on with what we do, promote the CTBT glorious, and always stretch our hands to you. The CTBTO forever. We have no doubts whatsoever.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and now we would like to give a floor to our colleague Nikita Tsymbalis to announce a small but surprisingly great competition that we are offering you now.
Yep. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. As you can understand, I'm Nikita Tsymbalis, and first of all, good afternoon for you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm honored to announce our presentation contest of the second Science Diplomacy Symposium, My Vision of the CTBTO. Here you can see the requirements of our presentation contest. First of all, we would like to have solo or duet performances, and we of course welcome the informal style of the presentations. And we also have very strict restrictions, only 17 slides and no more than 7 minutes of your presentations. And of course, images should prevail over the text. Of course, the winner will get a special prize and some international exposure, and which is more important and valuable, the experience and the wonderful opportunity to try in this wonderful contest and this format during this symposium. Here you can see the email where you should register. We would like to write your name and affiliation if you'd like to take part in our contest, and time and place will be announced later. So thank you for your attention. Please do not hesitate to ask us any questions about the contest or the performance of my colleagues. Thank you.
Well, I want to suggest we really encourage all the CTBTO youth group members to take an active part in our presentation contest. We have a list of assessment criteria. So we are ready to share this list with everybody who is interested in the contest. So again, I want to say that we are planning to hold this presentation contest during the second week on the margins of the CTBTO Science Diplomacy Symposium. Okay, I'm pretty sure we're going to have very honorable members of the jury who will evaluate the participants' presentations. And I'm pretty sure that just we will come up with more innovative and forward-looking proposals how to promote the values and the ideas of the CTBT. So, well, Anya Umerinka, whose just email was mentioned, is present. Well, Anya, just kind of like, hello, yes. So, well, just do not hesitate to get in touch with anybody from our group, and just we will provide more comments. If you have any questions, let us know. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have a very exciting and inspiring Pecha presentation contest, My Vision of the CTBTO. Thank you. Now, any questions, comments? No questions, comments. So thank you very much again.
Thank you very much to the whole team here from MEFI. If you do want more information about the contest, I'm sure you can approach our MEFI colleagues at any point, and we will announce in due course the time and place for the competition, which will be next week. Now, if you could just bear with me for a couple of minutes.
I just wanted to announce where we're meeting for the newsroom, if you don't mind. Is this on? Yeah. Just really quickly while we have a little break. First of all, what a fantastic presentation and what a wonderful way to show, you know, what I was talking about, creative ways of highlighting the importance of the treaty. So those of you who are interested in participating in the newsroom, the youth newsroom, and hopefully coming up with a daily paper. I think I have a volunteer for editor-in-chief right here, so thank you, Gaurav. We're meeting at 1:30 today in room C234, so that's just down the hall. So just show up, and all the more details on how to do it and what to do will follow. Yes.
I wanted to ask a question I didn't get to ask when you were up there before, and my question was: it seems like the CTBTO spectrum discontinued, and I wondered if that's true and if there are plans to revive it or to replace it. Thank you very much.
It is true. We have had experienced a hiatus in publication, but there are plans to restart publication, hopefully by the end of this year. So. Okay, so Cormac, here's your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've heard a lot so far about the CTBTO youth group. And it's now the youth group that's going to take over the symposium for the next hour and a half. So can I please ask the colleagues from the youth group who are taking part in the session to come forward to the podium? I'm just going to introduce you to Mr. Sahil Shah. I will leave the rest of the introductions up to him. Sahil, you have the floor.
Great. Hi, my name is Sahil Shah, and I'm pleased to kick off today's session on the CTBTO Youth Group, or CYG. In December of 2015, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted a groundbreaking resolution on youth, peace, and security, recognizing that young people play an important and positive role in the maintenance and promotion of international peace and security. UN Security Council Resolution 2250 requested that the Secretary General of the UN to carry out a progress study on the youth's positive contribution to peace processes and conflict resolution in order to recommend effective responses at the local, national, regional, and international levels, and to present the results of the study to the UN Security Council and member states. The long-awaited full version of the study, including detailed information about the research process, will be published this year. While I, especially as a young person, urge everyone to look over the full study due to its depth and diversity when it is released, I would like to begin my remarks today with the study's preliminary 3 central recommendations for how the peace and security community should work with young people in new ways before presenting a progress study of my own on the CYG. First, it is critical to invest in young people's capacities, agency, and leadership through substantial funding support, network building, and capacity strengthening, recognizing the full diversity of youth and the ways young people organize, which are obviously new today than they have been in the past. Second, the systems that reinforce exclusion must be transformed in order to address the structural barriers limiting youth participation in peace and security efforts. And third, partnerships and collaborative action where young people are viewed as equal and essential partners for peace must be prioritized. The UN SCR 2250 linked study acts as an unprecedented framework for how our elders can better revitalize conversations on peace and security issues at all levels in an inclusive and equally important, sustainable way. The idea of a post-Cold War generational gap plaguing the nuclear security community in particular is one that has been echoed time and time again, also at many CTBTO events. Yet few have actually made the investments necessary to responsibly educate emerging generations of not only the responsibilities they will inherit, but also the level of risk they should be realistically internalizing to use as a basis for creating their own priorities and policies as a result. This generational gap, configured into discourse as an empty void, too large to truly build bridges over, must be transformed through a different line of thinking. It is not a gray space, but a blank one that will only be colored by a transfer of knowledge if those who came before us take the time to be accessible and give opportunities we need to form our own opinions. Therefore, the intersection of these recommendations behind me and issues relative to nuclear security are of utmost importance. As the days go by, we lose more and more of the institutional and biographical memory that is needed for us to learn from the past and avoid making the same mistakes that have led us to a world embroiled by the issues seen today. Yes, those issues include a CTBT whose entry into force still lays in limbo, an issue that some consider as impossible as incentivizing young people to care about the issues we, here before you, are taking a stand on. For the purposes of why we are gathered here today, the recommendations listed behind me correlate remarkably well with the success of the CTBTO under the leadership of Executive Secretary Dr. Zerbo in building out its own next generational efforts. 1 month after the UN SCR 2250 was passed, the CTBTO Youth Group, or again CYG for short, was launched at the first Science Diplomacy Symposium in January of 2016. While there's always room for improvement and growth, I truly believe that both the letter and spirit of the CTBT, as well as the leadership of the Secretariat, allowed the CYG to begin fulfilling these 3 recommendations or needs from the group's inception. Given the emphasis placed on harnessing science and technology to build political willpower, as well as creating a culture of transparency and democratic decision-making, the CTBT is a unique example of an arms control agreement whose spirit runs healthily in parallel to its letter. In short, the objectives of the CTBT are indeed well defined. As young envoys for this treaty, the collective members of the CYG have had their job made easier because the strength of the treaty has laid an inspirational foundation for their efforts. At the original symposium where the group was launched, the handful of CYG members that were part of the group at the time had the chance, as you will also have this week, to hear from the original negotiators of the CTBT, the people who spent thousands of hours traveling around the world to dream up and then implement the treaty. This biographical memory, the lifeblood behind the CTBT, and the enduring relationships that still persist today, decades later from that process, continue to energize us all to truly utilize the CYG as a springboard to build our own peer-to-peer relationships. Since this year's symposium marks the 2-year anniversary of the launch of the group, I feel it is important to clearly outline what we have accomplished thus far so you can see the capacity of our now 400 plus diverse and coordinated membership base. This begins with an outline of the group's objectives. First, revitalize the discussion around the CTBT amongst decision makers, academia, students, expert society, and media. Raise awareness of the importance of the test ban. Build a basis for knowledge transfer to the younger generation, not just limited to young professionals, but also university students, high school students, and younger. Involve new technologies into promoting the CTBT, social media, digital visualization, interactive means of delivering information, etc. And lastly, placing the CTBT on the agenda of the world's most important nuclear-related events. These objectives guide the program of our work, from thinking of small-scale projects and initiatives to educate and build capacities, to developing a global, system-wide roadmap to facilitate coordination, and as we will learn, a much-needed coherence in pooling resources and translating the CTBT to the wider public. The greatest support the CYG has, other than the treaty itself, is the fact that the CTBTO has allowed us to identify strategic priorities, potential policies, and rooms for growth, as well as pragmatic approaches to facilitate the treaty's entry into force. In many ways, that process of identification has been a balancing act, from balancing generational and gender gaps to balancing backgrounds, both as a matter of disciplines, meaning our members' personal and professional interests, as well as their heritages. It has been an enduring process that has relied on CYG members' collective commitment to fight for the CTBT as a unit. For example, by exchanging views on a proactive and integrated outreach strategy that involves all generations, the evolving relationship between the CTBTO's Group of Eminent Persons, or GEM, and the CYG has included many fruitful interactions. Whether meeting with one another on the margins of events, or peer-reviewing their reports, or co-publishing op-eds, GEM and CYG members have revitalized energy in one another. In addition to an emphasis on cultivating intergenerational relationships, achieving a balance of interdisciplinary work amongst the CYG has also been a fruitful goal. By incorporating more students from the hard and soft sciences, the CYG has been able to better leverage the technological strengths of the CTBT and in turn better socially and politically translate them in its own advocacy work. We are joined by CYG member Maggie Wanyaga, who will speak more on science as an advocacy tool. She, as well as many others, remind us of one of the proudest elements of the CYG, the fact that we have exceeded gender parity and currently have a membership base of 56% women. With all these positive attributes under our belt, you may be asking, well, what is actually tangibly gained? What do you all actually do? CYG members regularly participate in and contribute to relevant events and activities to help raise awareness on the mandate of the organization and to convey the importance of the treaty. Over the past 2 years, CYG members have been involved in high-profile events in Washington, Havana, New York, Cancun, Paris, the Dead Sea in Jordan, Vienna, Brussels, and more. For example, the first International CTBTO Youth Group Conference was held in Moscow this past October, as explained by our colleagues from MEFI. This event was co-hosted by the CTBTO and the National Nuclear Research University, MEFI, and supported by the Russian Federation's Ministries of Defense and Foreign Affairs. The conference brought together members of the CYG, including nationals of 7 of the 8 non-ratifying Annex II states and Russian students, and offered an opportunity to discuss regional perspectives, learn more about the CTBT verification technologies, and work closely with GEM members on how to advance the entry into force of the treaty. CYG members moderated panels, presented research papers, and provided citizen journalism coverage of the conference through the CYG Newsroom project. Each research project presented in Moscow involved a peer review process in which CYG members from the countries under scrutiny, or those that were being written about, worked with those writing on their countries to produce more nuanced and credible outlooks. We are joined by CYG member Baruki Malowich, who will speak more about how the CYG has offered a unique space for collaboration and peer review in this regard. Due to the breadth of publication output from the CYG, all of which you can find online, members continue to engage in meaningful dialogue around the clock on not only the remaining 8 non-ratifying Annex II states and their relationships to the treaty, but also the 166 ratifying CTBT states, who many of us feel are often not held to task on doing enough to make the environment more encouraging for those remaining ratifications to actually occur. By identifying areas in which the CTBT's profile could be raised, such as through the 2020 NPT review cycle, the CYG also produces compelling research on various other areas of interest to the treaty. We are lucky to be joined by CYG member Grace Liu, who will speak about the role of open source intelligence and geospatial imagery in verification. A few weeks ago, Grace was one of many CYG members who spoke on the sidelines of the NPT Preparatory Committee meetings in Geneva, presenting a paper on how data received from the CTBTO, satellite imagery, and declassified materials can be used to verify and analyze nuclear test details, and in specific, the implications these technologies could have together to confirm future denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This brings me to my conclusion. When we reflect on the current environment, we find that while trying to tame the atom quite literally tamed us. At a time when the test ban has re-entered the political imagination of those tasked with reducing nuclear tension, I challenge all those who relegate the treaty to the back burner and place it on a list of political non-starters. It is my hope that through the course of these remarks, you have gained meaningful insight into why young people continue to be invited back here. We're making a collective effort, almost on a daily basis, to engage in cross-sector dialogue, produce intellectual work that can be leveraged by policymakers and activists alike, and innovate new means to translate as well as enhance the scientific and technical backbone of the CTBT. The UN Security Council resolution that I began this talk with calls on all relevant actors, including when negotiating and implementing peace agreements, to take into account, as appropriate, the participation and views of youth, recognizing that their marginalization is detrimental to building sustainable peace in all societies. This provision includes a key clause, as appropriate. In the case of the CTBT, the role of the youth in efforts to rally around the test ban these past 2 years have been not only deemed appropriate, but essential. As we move forward, we need continued access and support. Our goal is not building homogeneity, but consensus that relies on the strength of diversity, a tenet of the very multilateralism that led to the CTBT in the first place. After all, in the words of Dr. Zerbo, our challenge is not to rethink the very value of the multilateral approach, rather it is to put it back on track. Thank you. We are going to now proceed with the next 3 speakers, and I'm going to allow them each to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Sahil, and thank you, esteemed participants of the CTBT Second Science Diplomacy Symposium for inviting me to give this talk today. I was asked to talk a bit about my personal experience with the CTBTO youth group and to provide my interpretation of the work we do at the youth group from a social sciences perspective. But first, let me introduce myself. So my name is Baruch Himalevich. I'm an Israeli citizen and an aspiring academic focusing on the study of nuclear intellectualism and nuclear ethics. I joined the CTBT youth group late in the summer of last year and have since participated in the first CTBTO youth group conference held in Moscow in October of 2017. Frankly, I was not sure what to expect. A few years ago, I have made a habit of making up imaginary scenarios of how poorly conferences might go for me. And the flight from Tel Aviv to Moscow was no different and kind of full of nightmares. Yet, much to my relief, the conference in Moscow was an impressive and significant event, both on a personal and on an intellectual level. Of all the highlights of this conference, I believe that it was the unmediated meeting with sensitive and caring youth professionals that really stood out. Current friends and future colleagues, CYG members and MEFI students, all sharing a dream to mitigate some of the dangers of this world. That really made the Moscow the Moscow conference unforgettable for me. That meeting was preceded by a few weeks of an intense effort to put together a group research paper looking into CTBT ratification prospects in all Annex II countries. This process in itself was quite intimidating. Not only were we required to work on topics that some of us are unfamiliar with, I, for example, am much more familiar with political theory than with regional politics, but as a newcomer to the youth group, I had to work together with people I have never met in my life. This in its own was an enriching academic and intellectual experience, which proved how strong this youth group can be while working together and what high-end products it can come up with in relatively short time intervals, and showed the great potential of the collaborative work of caring strangers. The potential is important to me as an aspiring academic and a prospective PhD student. The CTBT as a treaty, as an institution, and as an idea poses a great deal of interesting questions that are directly related to some of the main research themes in the field of international relations. What is the meaning of a treaty that is widely respected but hasn't entered into force? How do great power politics shape the non-testing regime? Are we witnessing the emergence of a norm of non-testing nuclear weapons? Or what is the role of science and technology in shaping political and ethical beliefs about nuclear weapon testing? Such questions cut across various paradigms, levels of analysis, and academic traditions. They also feed into one another, influencing the way we think about global security and foreign affairs. This means that as an academic effort to better understand the CTBT and the challenges to the treaty is vital. And that does not merely justify collaboration of scholars from various fields and different backgrounds, but demands it. A great example of such a collaborative effort can be found, I believe, in the process we exercised while authoring the research papers for the CYG conference in Moscow, a process that has truly revolutionary potential. Instead of getting in great detail into each aspect of how these papers were written, I decided to focus here today on a specific aspect of that process, one often dreaded by both young and experienced academics, the peer review process. I will therefore proceed to outline the problems and pathologies of the peer review process in the field of political science, and proceed in describing the CYG's take on this process, describing how we work together in Moscow and how such an approach might create a healthier academic culture. While without a doubt fulfilling an important function in the world of academic literature, a quality assurance of sorts, the peer review process has turned into a stage for disciplinary infights and egomaniacal altercations. The number of blog posts, memes, and yes, peer-reviewed articles that deal with criticizing the peer review process attests to just how venomous and adversarial it has become, and how it enables vanity and hubris to corrupt our epistemic cultures. Moreover, the way it is currently conducted, the peer review process fails at being the gatekeeper it presumes to be. The Sokal affair, the case in which a physicist managed to publish an article full of jargonized nonsense in a postmodern cultural studies journal, provides an example of that. Incidentally, while reading up on the Sokal affair, I have found a fantastic Wikipedia page on scholarly publishing sting operations, so the infamous Sokal affair is not even a sole example. Finally, in many cases, the academic peer review becomes a burden, a necessary modification in order for the paper to get published. In that, this process has no real influence on the researcher. It does not improve one's academic rigor, nor does it expand one's horizon or allows one to seize better understanding of the literature. In a way, it goes against everything that made the academic want to become an academic in the first place. Several factors make this problem particularly acute in the social sciences and in the political science specifically. I've outlined 5 main pathologies. 1, the expanding borders of academic discourse. As disciplines evolve and cover more ground, it becomes more difficult to find suitable experts to judge in a constructive manner the arguments presented. 2, lack of unity in interpretation. Even if suitable experts can be found, the same literature can be read in more than one way, and therefore a peer reviewer might try to force their interpretation on an author. 3, jargonization of academic disciplines. Jargon is often used to cement disciplinary fault lines. However, as a field evolves and shifts, the meaning of jargonized terms shifts as well. This leads to disparities in how key terms are used and understood. Furthermore, jargon can be used to exclude groups from participation in discourse. 4, innovation motivation. Authors are incentivized to make significant contribution and therefore are systematically encouraged to abandon all principles of academic humility and instead embellish and sensationalize their findings. which also leads me to 5, ego. By rejecting papers that do not fit with their own ideas, reviewers cement their reputation as experts in the field. This is done both by adding hardships to their intellectual rivals and by making the process easier for their followers and disciples. On the run-up to the Moscow conference, we were asked to write papers about the background and prospects for ratification of each of the remaining Annex II countries. We worked in region-based groups, but in a counterintuitive way, each of us worked on countries outside our own regions. For example, the group I was in, consisting of American, Israeli, and Iranian CYG members, worked together to compile a paper dealing with China, India, and Pakistan's relations to the CTBT. We were each working outside our comfort zones and had to quickly but thoroughly enrich our knowledge about countries we are not necessarily familiar with. The peer review process then consisted of 2 steps: a round of suggestions and comments from CYG members from the countries we were writing about, and a final round of feedback from world-renowned experts and CTBT GEM members. The end product left something to be wanted, of course, but it was still a well-refined, high-end paper. Only in this case, it is the process that really matters, and how this process can negate many of the aforementioned pathologies of the conventional peer review process. First, our peer review process was an enticing intellectual experience. It enabled us, through our peers, to access intimate information that might even elude experienced scholars researching a foreign state. This is exactly the kind of access and professional support that every academic wishes he had prior to submitting a paper for review. This is a humbling experience, and it allows authors to portray a more complex and elaborate reality in their papers. Its benefits, therefore, are far deeper than the improvement of a single paper. This experience allows a researcher to understand some of the potential blind spots of their research design and how to intellectually engage a multifaceted, layered truth. Second, while this process omits the conventional blind system, the comments CYG members received stated the names of the reviewer, it allows the author to get unrelenting feedback without suffering a major blow to his sense or her sense of self-worth. After all, CYG members all knew that the reviewers are their friends and their peers, that they have nothing but each other's best interests at heart, and that this feedback was not written with an adversarial or humiliating intention. It also allows to challenge some of the reviews and enables the authors to practice judgment and scrutinize the feedback that they get. It therefore mitigates the ego problems and doesn't allow reviewers to intentionally impede the work of others. Finally, during our peer review process, it was noticeable that, in some cases, feedback points stemmed from a political, ideological, rather than an academic, intellectual difference. Initially, I must admit, I found them to be unnecessary and annoying. However, I now understand conventional peer review comments also arise at times from political disagreements. Only in such cases, the reviewers will do their best to conceal that it is indeed the reason for rejection and critique. It is therefore still, at least in a relative manner, a point of merit to be able to acknowledge such political disagreements and solve them openly without obfuscation and subterfuge. Additionally, this forces the researcher to tackle various points of view and to, once again, practice humility and try to empathize with other perspectives. Such empathy is a necessary instrument in the hands of academics because it challenges them to leave no stone unturned in search of the truth, even if that requires diminishing one's ego. While I'm not suggesting this variation of peer review to entirely replace the system that is in place today, I do believe that combining elements of it into the conventional method has radical potential to revolutionize our epistemic cultures, to turn it to a culture that chooses rigor over rigidity, prowess over tenacity, collaboration over credit. I am therefore grateful to belong to the CYG, and I'm excited to see how the culture we create here will change the way we think and act. I am also thankful to the very lenient definition of the word youth in this context. At 31, I am quite happy to be able to add the prefix youth to anything I do. At 31, I am also a relatively elderly representative of my generation, Generation Y, the millennials. Millennial. Seems like only the word is enough to make a baby boomer's blood boil. Much has been said about this generation, that we are self-centered, selfish, selfie fiends, that we are whiny but never come up with solutions, that we are picky about our education, our jobs, our technology, our food, and that we will sell our own grandmothers for a ripe avocado. Of course, millennials are so much more than that. We are a generation that is in a constant state of unrest because we realize the dangers that lie ahead. We are a generation that is relentless because we know there is much work to be done. We are a generation that will not accept things the way they are, that understands the world we see is not the only possible world. We seek to understand what we change and change what we understand, so as not to become utopians, dreaming of a better world while this one faces annihilation. We like to talk and we like to be heard, but we also like to listen. We like to see beyond the hashtags to communicate and understand one another. We understand the value of truth, of camaraderie, of accountability. We are better suited to accept responsibility individually and collectively. The members of the CTBTO youth group epitomize these values, and we are here to turn them into a new kind of politics, one based on friendship and not on gain, that shares a mutual fate and not just mutual interests. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm Magdalene Wanyaga. I'm the CYG coordinator in Africa. I am also a geologist and a graduate student at the University of Nairobi in applied geophysics. So my presentation is going to focus on science communication as a tool for advocacy and diplomacy. So to begin with, what is science communication? So this is the public communication of science-related topics to a wider audience, and it's aimed at achieving the Voile analogy where we're talking about awareness, enjoyment, interest, options, and understanding, most importantly, of science. Basically, scientists are trained to communicate to peers in a precise manner, which is a method that is limited when it comes to communicating to broad audiences. Therefore, this demands that there is a need for excellent public engagement with science to build a foundation of clear, concise communication, especially when we are trying to relay information that is so technical to people who cannot get the jargon, as he said, and all these aspects. So before we relay the information, we need to have this order. Number one, what is the goal that we want to achieve? And why are we communicating? What is this that we want to pass through as scientists to each and everyone who is in the audience? Number two, who are we addressing? So this comes in if you're going to present something to maybe people from the political disciplines. How are you going to arrange your work? How are you going to communicate to them? Are you going to use jargon as you would when you're communicating to your peers, or use better, use words that will relate to them? Number three, what exactly are we saying? Which message do we want to pass? How did, according to what you came and what you concluded in your research, how are you going to relay this to the people that you are communicating to? So the ideal approach for an effective communication, this is whatever we do in science is not the same as what we will do to the general public who wants to know the what and the why. This is a diagram which explains how researchers and people from who are not scientists want to understand the information now. So at first, the researcher will check at the background, will come from a broader perspective down to something that is concise. And on the other hand, the public will want to know, especially, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about this? So they come from a triangle, which is not the same as the other one. So at first we look at the background, we look at the supporting details, and then do our research and come to the conclusions and discussions. On the other hand, we start from the bottom line, so what, and then we go back to the supporting details, which is number two for the scientist. So these are the differences that we do have in communicating, and so that we can have an effective communication, the scientists basically have to strike a balance between the two, the inverted triangle and the triangle, so that we can have better communication of what we want to achieve. So the classical design strategy for communication. Number one, we have to design information that appeals to each worldview. Do not be biased to your scientific worldview alone. Number two, framing information in non-alienating language and minimal value of judgments, especially in diplomacy. Then we go to designing the message with support from multiple worldviews. Then using relevant metaphors and telling a meaningful story of what you are trying to communicate. Then understanding how your own values influence your communication. And finally, understanding how other values influence other people's perceptions. This order or strategy is not like limited to however I've stated it. These things can be interchanged and you can try even at the first stage when you're designing the information that appeals to each worldview, you could try and understand how others values their influence and perceptions. So finally, methods, when you come to methods of advocacy, basically at the CYG level, there are two main methods for advocacy. One is lobbying or direct communication, which involves the direct communication to private to directly or privately with decision makers, which is particularly through personal meetings and can be powerful, cost-effective tools. As we've seen as youth, we wouldn't say that we have the financial benefits, so we have to look for ways that are cost-effective, ways that we can be able to pass through the message at the minimum cost. So if we are able to, like last time we had the newsroom project where we were able to talk to various people and directly communicating to them, asking them what they think about the CYG and all, and what we should do. So it's a thing that I will advocate for us as CYG to use, a method that I will advocate for us to use. The number two method is campaigning. This involves speaking publicly on an issue with a view to generate a response from the wider public and using a variety of techniques, but not limited to opinion pieces and letters to the editor. This I've given an example of the newsroom project that we had, and which has been going on since SNT 2017. Number two, endorsing declaration statements against nuclear non-proliferation. We've been doing this. We had, like a month ago, we endorsed a declaration that we all wrote, and with this you have to consider time on what you want to endorse and what's the audience generally. Number three, web-based bulletins and online discussions. This has been going on especially with the various CYG regions and the use of social media avenues. Like last time at the SNT 2017, we had a video where we were that was to advocate for nuclear non-proliferation, and we were pouring water on each other whether to nuke or not nuke each other. So that is a method. After taking the video and spreading it through social media, it involves a lot of people at the end of the day, and we are able to advocate for ratification of the CTBT. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, that's loud. All right. So last, but hopefully not least, my name is Grace Liu, and I'm currently a research associate at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies in Monterey. I'm also a recent graduate from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, also in Monterey, and I'm proud to be a CYG member. And today I was asked to speak on my work that I do as a researcher at CNS, and that is in the field of open source analysis, open source intelligence, and using technical verification for disarmament and non-proliferation initiatives. To preface my talk, I just flew in like 2 hours ago. I've been awake for like 40 hours, so if I start sounding crazy, just escort me off of the dais, feed me food or something. So to begin, I want to highlight a few of the new tools that we use at CNS to conduct our open source analysis and our scientific verification. So the first one is geospatial analysis. So here we use satellite imagery, particularly with our partners at Planet Labs, who provide these images of, they actually provide an image of every square inch of land on Earth at least once a week. So we're able to have comparative images at a really high frequency, and it's fantastic. But in addition to this, we also use ground source imagery, and with that, we use photographic analysis. So we'll look at the metadata in a photo, and also use photo forensics to see, well, is this photo legitimate? Has it been tampered with? Has some of the metadata been pulled? So is someone trying to hide something from the people who are looking at this image? So that's our second form of analysis that we take. The third one is 3D modeling. So I don't know if you are all familiar with the 3D models of ballistic missiles through the NTI website or from CNS, but we model missiles, we model nuclear facilities, and different technologies related to nonproliferation and disarmament. And in a little bit, I'll actually walk you through one of the most recent models that we did of the Punga test site in North Korea. So lastly, one of the other tools that we use for our analyses is Ims Data. So the International Monitoring System has stations, as most of you know, all around the world that collects on seismic data as well as hydroacoustic and all of that as well. So we use Ims Data and other seismic analysis to inform our analyses using geospatial data and what we put into our models. So, oh, cool, it's up. All right. So as you can see, this is the, oh, is this working? Oh, there we go, sweet. So this is one of the more recent models that we've created, and this is the Punga test site in North Korea. This is where the country has tested their 6 nuclear tests to date, most recently in 2017. So like I explained before, a lot of different sources of analysis went into the making of this model. So this included geospatial, satellite imagery, ground source imagery, a lot of seismic data that we pulled from IMS, as well as analyses by seismologists, particularly in geolocating the epicenter of each of the 6 nuclear tests, as well as the relative size of each test, which really informs how we can look at this test space, what North Korea's capabilities are, how they are improving over time, and then eventually, now that Kim has announced that they are willing to close this test site and dismantle it, then we can see or make an analysis of what we should expect to be closed and expect to be dismantled at this site if we want to verify that it will never be tested at again. So I will slowly click through this. Is that readable? No? Okay. If not, we can definitely share this link so you can go and click through it, but I'll just do a very quick overview. So this is satellite, oh, sorry. Oh, this is difficult. All right, so from the top down, you can see this is a satellite image that we got from our partners at Planet Labs, and they're the satellite company, thank you, the satellite company who provides high-frequency satellite imagery. And so you can see here, this is generally what it would look like if you were to walk to Punga today. And where the first label is, that's where we assess the main tunnel entrances converge. So I'll just click through this quickly. But once we go under the mountain, we've made models of what we assess their test tunnels to look like. And these lead to each of these 6 nuclear tests. And so as you can see with the relative sizes that as the tests go on, their capabilities of building a more powerful, higher yield weapon increases over time. And we actually put the Statue of Liberty in there for scale, so now you can really see how massive these cavities are. And so the maroon cavity that's more of the geodesic shape to the left, that was their most recent 6th nuclear test, with a yield of, I think the assessed range was between 100 to several hundred kilotons. And it was assessed to, or a lot of experts believe that it was a thermonuclear weapon. And so you can really see, even compared to the 5th test, whose cavity's inside the larger test, you can see how much bigger it was than their 2nd biggest test. So what can a 3D model like this tell us? And so, like I mentioned, it allowed us to really look under the mountain and see how much space they have in order to conduct these tests. So at the time of the 6th test, when we put that cavity in there, we were able to look up into the mountain and see that, well, even if this weapon was a couple hundred kilotons, because of the size of the mountain, the amount of overhead they have, they could test a much, much larger weapon in this tunnel system if they wanted to. And that's something that was shocking to us and very informative in being able to say, well, they may even choose to dig more tunnels and do even larger tests in the future. So with satellite imagery, we were actually able to see that they did start building 2 more tunnels apart from this main tunnel where they conducted 5 out of their 6 tests. So there is a south portal that began construction in 2009, and the west portal that they began construction at in 2015. So we can see even up till very recently, they were doing a lot of new construction and possibly some renovation at the site. So something else that we can see from the model as well as satellite imagery is some spoil. So when you dig out tunnels, all that earth that you remove has to go somewhere. So when we are able to keep track of the changes that happen at this site over days and weeks and months, we're able to see changes in, oh, well, there's a new dirt pile over here, so that dirt must have come from somewhere. Or it looks like they leveled this area over here, so they might be preparing to lay down new buildings, foundations for more infrastructure for testing. We're just able to see that type of activity. And lastly, and most recently, since the announcement of North Korea's dismantlement and closure of the nuclear test site, we have been following them very closely through satellite imagery and updating our model to reflect some changes that we've seen. And I'll be happy to share the articles with you, but we recently discovered that they had already started dismantling some of the buildings outside of the test tunnels. So there were some support structures. If you see, yeah, in the middle there, don't know if I can zoom in. Yeah. So in this area right here, where the 3 main tunnel entrances are, there was actually some support structures that about 3 to 5 days after they announced the closure, those buildings, we just immediately saw them disappear. So there was some very quick action following the promise of closure at this site. And we think that further geospatial information, as well as being able to update our model, will allow us to follow and better verify their closure and the dismantlement of this site. So just to wrap this all up and try to make this more meaningful towards just disarmament in general and treaty verification, especially towards a ban treaty, I think the work that we do at CNS using these new tools, building models, geospatial analysis, as well as using seismic data and photo analysis, we're able to see that verification measures for such treaties is possible, it's realistic, it's codifiable, and it's available in the open source if we are able to be creative enough to process the information that we have. And being available in the open source, we're able to engage more people, so more students, more experts, more diplomats in the verification process, and therefore get people more involved and more invested in not only in the information that we collect, but the outcome of these treaties that we're able to create. Cool. Thank you.
Great. So the original intention for how we would reuse our remaining time was to do a breakout session in which we would procure ideas from the audience, but I think we're going to actually reserve that for Thursday's academic forum, which is going to include a breakout session that will ask participants to kind of form groups and work together to think of new ways to advocate for the treaty. So I think we could proceed into a Q&A session, and once that is over, then we can proceed with the rest of the day's program. So are there any questions? Sure, go ahead.
So this is a question for you. I'm so sorry I didn't get the name.
Grace.
Grace, thank you.
And what's your name?
My name's Louis. So sorry, how rude of me. So we've recently gotten notice that the testing site has apparently collapsed. In what ways were you able to predict that, if at all?
That's a really good question. So predictive and analysis that can be predictive is very different than analysis that verifies. So prediction-wise, I guess we could say we potentially predicted it, but really it was, hindsight's always 20/20. So when we heard that, when we saw the seismic data that there was another seismic event there and that it was most likely a tunnel collapse, the first thing we went to was actually geospatial imagery. And using that, and there's another article actually on armscontrolwonk.com, we were able to see that the mountain caved a little bit. So if you switch between these two satellite images, you can see that the mountain collapses a tiny bit. And so we could actually see and verify that there was some type of collapse, some type of caving in within Mount Montauk. But as far as prediction, we know that at a certain cavity size and depending on the weight of the overburden as well as the geological makeup of the site, obviously the larger the cavity, the more likely a collapse is going to happen. So when we went back and looked at the size of the, that's me, not the test site. But if you go back and look at the size of the 6th nuclear test, it was absolutely massive. So when we looked at it again, we said, oh, well, this is huge, so it must have, collapsed. And so again, hindsight's 20/20. We didn't really predict it, but we were able to, after the fact, go back and verify that something had happened. But good question, thanks.
Great, are there any other questions? Sure, Peter?
I think this is addressed to all the panel, but I want to know, how do you engage the public in the work you're doing? How do you give a sense of involvement to people outside who you're trying to communicate with, rather than assuming it's a passive audience? I think the key is to provide information for action rather than just consumption. I'd love to hear that, from everybody in this room. How the hell do you do it?
Sure. I think that we have a pretty wide program of different initiatives that we've undertaken to specifically interact with the public. The largest being that the CTBTO, especially through the Newsroom Project, has helped a lot of members publish op-eds, also op-eds that are actually jointly authored with GEM members, which means that obviously they're going to get a lot more attention in the media. And these have varied from being in local papers to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to Teen Vogue. So I think that by dispersing the message to very different types of publications, we've definitely succeeded so far at using our ability to write. In terms of ability to speak, I think that having CYG members present at nuclear-related events is one thing, but again, it is an echo chamber of experts and diplomats who are working on the topics. So in order to speak to the public, we have also engaged in creating interviews that are audible and hopefully will be released in the form of a podcast, as well as ensuring that a lot of the advocacy tools that the CYG builds out are filmed or put on YouTube and spread in that kind of visual capacity. One thing that I hope is built out in the coming year is that we, have more work undertaken that is like Grace's, which utilizes data visualization. I think that it's especially important and is definitely a very, very interesting way to garner the attention of especially young people. So that's something that we hope to expand.
You asked how do we encourage action, and you had this underlying assumption that it's only about the dissemination of information and making it more accessible. But I think it's actually a lot more than that. I think we have to change the way we think about these things, and we have to educate people not only to know more, but to think in a different way. And I think, and again, like I come from a theory perspective, and I think that is exactly where theory comes in, to help us think of problems from very different perspectives, and to try and bring together various resources and various inputs, and to try and tackle a complex reality. Because I think that when we simplify it and when we just think that, okay, it's a one-way street, then at the first hurdle, we just give up. But if we understand the complexities, and if we understand that it is going to be difficult and take some time, then we might overcome together the obstacles. So I think it's also about changing the way we think and not just about making information accessible.
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to use it as a shameless plug for one of our really cool initiatives that we started a couple years ago called Geo for Non-Pro. Is anyone familiar with it? Has anyone used it? Okay, perfect. So you can just Google it. It's Geo, G-E-O, the number 4, and Non-Pro, N-O-N-P-R-O, which is basically a crowdsourcing platform for geospatial analysis. So what we do is, because we have the relationship with these satellite companies, we're able to purchase or acquire high quality satellite imagery. And so what we'll do is publish these, and anyone can go on and use your email to create a login, and you can go and be your own geospatial sleuth in these areas of interest. And so like Punga's there, I believe Novaya Zemlya is there. There's just places all around the world, like very interesting areas, where you can go and see what you can find there. If you can find tunnel entrances, maybe old test stands, and you can put a pin there and annotate it. So we want to crowdsource everyone's expertise, even if you're not necessarily an expert. We all have eyes. We can all click through, satellite imagery, and it's interesting to see what other people can find that you maybe glossed over the first time. So I think something like that, again, something that enables and engages people to not only acquire information, but even contribute their own analysis or little piece of information, I think is vital to engaging more people.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, so my response would be, from my background, what we do and what I encourage mainly members from Africa to do is engage in active research, especially in the scientific background. This is how we progress. This is how we know what's going on. Without research, we cannot actually know what we want. Okay, we cannot get the picture of what is going on, basically, in my background of earth processes. Also, the use of IMS data, data from the IMS stations, and to come up with projects that can go, they're not bounded to any limits, and integrate both scientists and non-scientists in this research, not only scientific research based, yeah.
Just to add to that, there is an important activity that's going to occur this week on Thursday, which is the academic roundtable. It's really like an academic and advocacy roundtable, in which we are going to have speakers kind of outline how we can break out of the existing vortex, which focuses so much on this echo chamber of reproducing the same knowledge and sentiments for a very niche audience, And we hope that you all will attend on Thursday morning, because if there's anything that comes out of the symposium that gives time to participants to creatively work together, to think of productive things that not only the youth group, but all of us as advocates for the treaty could be doing, it is the academic roundtable or academic forum. So definitely please try to join us on Thursday morning. And I believe that there might be a question to the left. Yes?
Hi, my name is David. This is a question to Grace, and it's more technical. I know we have a DPRK roundtable coming up on Friday, but is CNS or NTI in conjunction doing anything to, because Punggiri may not, even if it closes down, it could still open up later on and provide space for further tests. So are you, I saw that, I'm on the Geo for Non-Pro website now, and one of the questions is where will North Korea test next? And so if they do decide to test, they could open up the mountain again, and there are many different locations within the mountain that they can open up testing for. Is that correct? And is there anything that CNS is doing to project that kind of future testing? If you can expound on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's those are great questions. So what we're doing, oops, broke something. What we're doing is kind of twofold. So one of them is being a little more preventative, again, using satellite imagery to look at other spaces in that mountain range to see, oh, are there spoils suddenly appearing where dirt's being removed? Are there suddenly an influx of vehicles or support buildings being set up in another part of the mountain? So we are constantly monitoring for that. The second thing is we are currently and potentially working with reporters who may be invited to view the closure, to kind of train them and say, hey, this is what you should be looking for. Hey, or if you don't see this, that might be kind of weird. But just to give them kind of a brief overview of what they should expect, and then so they know what they're looking for. So those are, I would say, the two things that we're currently doing, but if you have suggestions, we're definitely open to them. Thanks.
Okay, in the back, yes?
Thank you very much for your presentations. I actually have a sense of elitism in the conversation, in the sense that it's too much of, it's sort of from academia to intergovernmental elitism or intergovernmental expert field. But one thing that is still left out is how do we take this message beyond the spaces of people who can read and write, beyond the spaces of people who can use softwares and apps. Why this is really very important is that if you look at some Annex II states like Pakistan and India, there are people who would like to, if this message of the CTBT gets to them, as a populace, they can frame national preferences in terms of how the how governments then act in the international scene. But if we keep this conversation within academia or within intergovernmental arenas, I think we are still missing something, and there's still a need to harness this opportunity, especially to get to young people and even to the elderly in those spaces where they do not understand the kind of language we speak. Because in your presentations, what I really sort of get, it's so much of interdisciplinary connections, you know? So beyond these academic spaces, how do we take these conversations to those who can read and who can't read and write, and to those who can't even use the apps? It's really very important for us to engage deeper into these areas. Thank you.
This is actually the primary question or objective of the forum that's going to be held on Thursday morning, which is how do we exit this vortex? I'm going to give a presentation there on specifically exactly what we're talking about, which is how, you know, nuke speak and the way that these issues are articulated and have purposefully been articulated is done in a way that's very sterilized and for a niche audience. And oftentimes, if you look at what we consider the peripheries or the margins or the marginalized parts of the international system, you find a lot of populations that have been adversely affected, for example, by nuclear testing. So by liberating those voices and allowing, those spaces to be able to speak themselves on how nuclear testing has interacted with their communities, with their health, with their environment, and the generational trauma that has been a result, that to me is one specific way that we can kind of address that, and that's what I'll talk about on Thursday. But outside of that, the main portion of Thursday morning's exercise is to break out into groups and to specifically work together and try to come up with concise recommendations and then present them after the breakout session occurs. So I'm very happy that you posed that question because it's something that everybody should think up in the lead up to Thursday morning. Absolutely. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to respond.
So I think you make a really, really good point, and I'll use kind of an anecdote. I think there are more than just technological barriers or barriers of literacy, but also language barriers that may also prevent some people who aren't necessarily fluent in English or Chinese or any other language to access research or information from other countries. So I think one good thing that one of our, I guess, competitors, but actually, co-partners, 38 North has started doing is actually publishing I think most or all of their articles in English, Chinese, and Korean, and I believe Russian also, which is really cool because it is kind of speaking to, I guess, not your exact point, but breaking down the barriers of making this information accessible to more people. But on that note, I think that's the value of getting a more diverse youth group and getting more people involved in nuclear issues in general, is because each of us, I think, coming from wherever we're from, we have a specific community or group that we can best speak to. And if we don't have a representative from a certain group, then that message isn't going to get there. So I know that's kind of a vague answer, but I think that again speaks to getting a more diverse group and getting more people involved in general.
So my response to that, basically when it comes to like our continent in Africa, we don't have this nuclear talk at the household level. So my answer will be more informal and try to urge all of us here, which I also did last year at the SNT, is to advocate from the grassroots level. We should not just expect us to come and tell the people at the high levels and think that without involving the people at the grassroots, those people who do not understand what nuclear is, what the test does to them, and they do not understand the effects of all these things. We have to educate them first, and it doesn't have to be a formal way. We can start in an informal way and progress, forward to where we can hold on workshops and include the communities and the various people in the communities. That will be my answer.
I think it's a really great question, and I don't really have a proper answer. I would like to even expand it and say that it's not just about being able to read and write, or about language, or about accessing technology. It's also about the nature the discourse takes in different cultures. So again, I'm from Israel, and no one in Israel talks about the nuclear issue or about nuclear testing, and there's such a strong taboo that when professors of international relations try to bring it up, then the students feel uncomfortable and try to dissuade them from mentioning it. And so I think also the form of the discourse is another thing that kind of censors the discussion and makes it very difficult to open these things up. So that's one thing. And then I would also like to address what you said about the elitism and the academic approach. And I think you're 100% on point there. And I think that this is a question that should bother all of us about we we think sometimes about these things as if it's the gospel, and if the only thing we need to do is to like bring it to the people. And I think that is very, like, this runs the risk of like intellectual condescending, being like intellectually condescending, and I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges to academia for the next century at least. So thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, sure, go ahead.
So I have another one for Grace. I'm so sorry, you must be so tired, but you gave me a good 3D model and now I'm hooked. So I would like to know, what options do states like North Korea have to obstruct verification related evidence, and what ways do you have to kind of outsmart them if they tried?
Wow, yeah, that's a big question. So I guess one of the kind of funny things that's happened somewhat recently is some countries have been starting to use certain types of roof coverings because there are certain satellites that don't just use visible light bands, but also non-visible light bands in order to basically penetrate solid materials to kind of see what's under that. And so I can't say that CNS has that capability. I wish we did, but we know that certain militaries do. So there's a lot of countries who have started doing something like that. But what we've been able to do to outsmart it, at least on the open source, is I guess work with people like Planet and get more high frequency imagery, because there are times when countries have put tarps or buildings with that covering over things, so you can't really see them or see anything underneath otherwise. But with this frequency, they have to take the tarp down sometimes, or they have to renovate the buildings. So sometimes we'll get really lucky and just catch a glimpse of what is there, just because we have such frequent imagery. So I guess that's one example, but in general, just creative application of the information that we have. And I think that's one of the most incredible things that I've found about the team that I get to work with, is that there have been like so many innovative solutions and approaches to using just day-to-day knowledge that we just take for granted, and kind of flipping it in a way that gives more informed analysis of certain issues. So yeah, good question. We can talk more about that. It's a huge topic.
Okay, I think that we had another question left. Yes.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Espinosa. I'm originally from Chile. I have a question. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for the extremely relevant work that you do. I had to follow this up, and it's really, really important. I would like to ask, do you develop like training for youth members on how to lobby government, for instance, both in the national level and also international level? I ask this because the contribution of the youth is extremely relevant in all the diplomatic processes. And back in the day, my experience as a lobbyist for the Lunchman campaign and cluster munition campaign, as well as the ATT process, I was very, very fortunate to have access to this kind of training. And this really, really contributed to the way that we youth could help government advance, in this case, for instance, for the entry into force of the treaty. Thank you very much.
Sure, I can try to answer that. So through the youth group, at different points when we've convened, we have actually used a lot of the time that we've spent together to learn from one another and identify the different pressure groups or pressure points that exist in the different countries that are represented in the youth group's decision-making processes. And because it is so different, to lobby in America is very different than lobbying in Iran or somewhere else. So I think that by having conversations with one another, we've actually gained a lot, because it's very interesting to learn who makes decisions in these different places. to continue to just brand it as the 8 remaining Annex 2, it doesn't really speak in a nuanced way, but through the youth group, we've learned a great deal specifically from the members. In terms of lobbying and learning how to advocate in general, definitely. We've had a lot of support from the CTBTO, especially through the Newsroom project, on how to articulate these issues in a compelling and persuasive way, which isn't limited to lobbying government, but also mainly the public.
Additionally, I think that I think there's very clearly like the official and more visible side to the CYG, but there's also the very unofficial, just like friendly aspect of it. So I think you know, we get to know each other, we keep in touch, we talk a lot, we exchange ideas, even just to tackle like a certain hurdle or a crisis. We always have other like caring people to turn to. So I think this is like another very like strong point of the CYG. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Can't quite see. No? Okay, sure, go ahead.
I have a question to Grace. Sorry. So you mentioned the Geo4 Non-Pro, the resource that you mentioned, and you said that everyone has like an easy access to this resource. So have you ever had any cases when like people from not this like community really pointed out something that worth paying attention to, something suspicious, and does it really work in a way you expected it to work?
Yeah, so absolutely. And not only in Geo for Non-Pro, but if you're familiar with the blog Arms Control Wonk, there's these articles on like analyses from experts or from guest authors. And a lot of the time, actually more often than not, there's just random commenters who, point out something or some argument in the comment section or find something on Geo for Non-Pro that's just stunning to even, experts like Jeffrey Lewis or Melissa Hannum who look at this on a daily basis. So yeah, and so as still a developing expert, like I think I've been so impressed with just the general knowledge of people who aren't necessarily trained in nuclear issues in any way, because, looking at something with fresh eyes, sometimes you can see more than someone who looks at it every day. So yeah, definitely very impressive.
Okay, last call for questions. All right, excellent. Thank you so much for your attention. Again, Thursday morning is the academic roundtable/forum, and also CYG members will be featured on panels throughout the week. And please come up to us, ask us questions, introduce yourself, and if you have specific recommendations for how the CYG can better advocate in your home country or home region, please share with us so that we can embolden our work to advocate for the test ban. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Sahil and to all of the youth group members who took part in this panel, and to all youth group members as well who are here in the room. Can I just ask you please to kindly stay behind for a few minutes, those members of the youth group, as we go to lunch. There's just going to be a little cluster, a get together. For everybody else, we're going to move into the lunch break now until 2:30 p.m. For those of you who don't know where the cafeteria is, you can take the elevator down to the ground floor and move towards the F building, and that's where the cafeteria is. So we're going to resume this afternoon with 3 sessions, which are presentation-based and which go into the origins of the CTBT, the history of nuclear testing, and which also go into such issues as understanding the legal scope of the treaty, and looking into the organization as it currently is and as it will be after entry into force. So I wish you all an enjoyable lunch and see you back here at 2:30 p.m. Thank you.